Okay, everybody, we are going to get started here tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm very excited about our program this evening. We have the fabulous Josh Lipnick, who many of you know already is the wonderful photographer behind Midwest Modern. If you have been to our museum anytime since May 1st, you also know him as the fantastic photographer behind our current temporary exhibition. So I highly recommend, if you have not been here yet, to soak in the exhibition in person. It begins outside in our hallway to the left of the donor board and then continues in this lecture hall room where we are right now. Another little tidbit I'm going to send out, you may have seen on your way in or online, that we are starting promotion for our annual fundraiser is on October 3rd this year. And very excitingly, the centerpiece of our event is a silent auction where we will be auctioning off the photographs from this exhibition. So you all have a chance to bring a Lipnick home with you. Now, Josh Lipnick is a Detroit-based architectural photographer, writer, and public speaker, a graduate of the University of Michigan's Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. His photographs have been featured in publications including the Chicago Reader, Belt Magazine, and Financial Times. Like I said, he is the photographer behind our current temporary exhibit as well as Midwest Modern. I should have said, and I'm Madeline Crispell. I'm the museum's curator. Thanks everybody for being here. Without further ado, Josh, take it away.
All right, thank you everyone for coming out. Can you guys hear me good on the microphone here? Okay. So today we're going to look at some maritime architecture of the Upper Peninsula. I'm currently doing a tour of Michigan, doing a presentation just on the architecture of the Upper Peninsula in general. So I've sort of adapted that to have a maritime focus, but we'll also be looking at some interesting architecture that's not necessarily maritime, and a lot of architecture having to do with the mining industry, which is sort of, to me, like the very intimately tied with maritime trade and shipping and all of that. So it'll all connect together into a nice picture of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and hopefully maybe inspire some people to visit up there. So before we get into the photos, we're going to look at a few maps to give some context to the Upper Peninsula. So this is a map of the copper and iron ranges in the Upper Peninsula, which is essentially the reason that anyone lives there at all. Copper and iron were both discovered there in the 1840s, and that is really when settlement of the Upper Peninsula took off. So here we can see you have three major iron ranges. So here you have the Menominee Iron Range that's centered around the city of Iron Mountain. This is along the border with Wisconsin. You have the Gogebic Iron Range further up the border with Wisconsin, centered on the town of Ironwood, and they would ship their iron ore out of Ashland, Wisconsin. Up on the Keweenaw Peninsula, you have the Copper Range of Michigan. This was one of the most important copper ranges anywhere in the world in the 1800s and into the early 1900s. Then the last iron range, the largest of the iron ranges in Michigan, this is the Marquette Iron Range. This was focused on the cities of Ishpeming and Negaunee, and they would ship all of that ore out of the port of Marquette. So here you can see a flow diagram of different types of minerals that were specifically iron ores coming out of Lake Superior area. So you can see here iron coming out of the Marquette area, Escanaba, and then Ashland, Wisconsin here. And then the much, much larger iron range in Minnesota, which we will not be looking at today. But you can see comparing the flows coming out of Michigan to Minnesota, they had the much larger iron ranges. Copper was really the major export here.
What was the year about that? Was it 1940?
Let's see. Yeah, 1951. So you can see this was all going to the steel mills in Gary, down into Lake Erie to Cleveland and on to Pittsburgh and the major steel towns in the Rust Belt. Yeah. This is a map of Jacobsville sandstone. So this was one of the most important building materials that was harvested in the Upper Peninsula. You can see here an example of that sandstone. It was one of the hardest of the sandstones, which is generally sort of a lighter stone that tends to chip. So it was a very highly prized building material. If you see sandstone buildings in Chicago, it's very likely that that was shipped from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This one is not quite as relevant to the maritime trade, but this is looking at the different ethnic groups in the Upper Peninsula. So just to give a basic overview, the area around Sault Ste. Marie, this was red here, was showing Canadians. So there was a huge Canadian population on this end. There were also pockets of Polish farmers and immigrants who migrated from the Lower Peninsula, huge Polish presence all along the coast of the Lower Peninsula here. Down towards Green Bay here, you have major cities like Escanaba and Menominee, and this was the most heavily German area of the Upper Peninsula. Obviously, Wisconsin has a large German population, and that spilled over into Michigan. You also had immigrants from Sweden, Norway, all of the Scandinavian countries. Up here in the Iron Range, the green here means plurality Finnish. So the Finns were the largest ethnic group in the Upper Peninsula. They flocked to all of the iron and copper ranges. So you can see here up in the Keweenaw, green, and this striped is also Finn. So very large Finnish population there. You also had big pockets of Italians coming to work in the iron mines around Iron Mountain and Ironwood. And the copper mines brought people from all over the world. You had large groups from Yugoslavia, Poland, all over Eastern Europe, in addition to Finland. So this last map here is showing Detroit Lions versus Green Bay Packers fans. So the somewhat serious point here is that you get a lot more influence from Milwaukee and also Chicago as you get further west in the peninsula. Keep in mind, the Mackinac Bridge did not connect the Upper and Lower Peninsulas till 1957. So the early history of the Upper Peninsula was much more closely tied to Wisconsin and especially Green Bay, which was the closest major city, if you can call it that. So this is just a map showing the route we're going to take. So we're just going to kind of go all around the outside of the peninsula, start in St. Ignace, which is where Michiganders would be entering the Upper Peninsula. If you're coming from Chicago, you would probably be entering through Menominee here. So you can kind of pick up here if you plan your own trip. So we'll go all along the coast of Lake Michigan, up along the Wisconsin border through the Iron Ranges, then up into the Keweenaw to the Copper Ranges, and then we'll look at some good maritime history along the Lake Superior coast here in Marquette and Munising, and end at the Sioux Locks in Sault Ste. Marie. So this is the Museum of Ojibwa Culture in St. Ignace, Michigan. This was where Father Marquette started his first mission to the Native Americans. That was in 1671. So the current church wasn't built until 1830s. So there was about 200 years there between Father Marquette's discovering the Upper Peninsula and when copper and iron were discovered, that there wasn't a lot of at least European history. So Father Marquette ended up passing away in Ludington, Michigan in the Lower Peninsula, but his body was brought back to St. Ignace where he founded his mission, and he was buried in Father Marquette Park here. So as the gateway to the Upper Peninsula, St. Ignace is a bit of a tourist trap. with a lot of novelty architecture from the 50s and 60s. So here you have a giant faux lighthouse as well as a faux Native American structure. So you have all types of interesting curios like this in St. Ignace. You also, in St. Ignace, can find pasties, which is the official food of the Upper Peninsula. If you don't know, it's sort of a pocket of dough filled with ground meat, and rutabaga is the most important ingredient. So going along the Lake Michigan coast, here we have Gustafson's smoked fish in Moran, Michigan. And you can see here an example of the fish smokehouses. So I think this is sort of an interesting mini typology of buildings that we'll see at least one more of around the Upper Peninsula. Here we have in Manistee, Michigan, the municipal pumping station. It was built in 1921, and the architect was from Denmark named Fridolf Danielsen. This is, in my opinion, one of, if not the most impressive water tower in all of Michigan. The bottom was the pumping station where they would pump water from the Manistee River, and the top half had a 200,000 gallon tank that would supply water to the fire department. So this was not for drinking water. This was specifically built to feed water to the fire department. Here you can see a better view of that grand entrance into the pumping station. And then here we can see the Manistee River. So I just wanted to show this as an example of some of the light industry that you see in towns along Lake Michigan. Really much more similar to some of the Rust Belt towns that you'd see in the lower parts of the Midwest. So small industries like furniture, small metal assembly, that type of thing. You can see here they have heavily channelized and concretized this river here. So now we're going down the Garden Peninsula on Lake Michigan. This is the ghost town of Fayette, Michigan, founded in 1867. This is the most well-preserved ghost town in Michigan. It was originally founded by the Jackson Iron Company of Cleveland. Cleveland firms had a huge stake in the iron industry in the Upper Peninsula. So they founded this town as an iron smelting company town. So here you see this was the town hall in the middle. This was a hotel for visiting guests and people from the company that were visiting. This was the blacksmith shop. Here you can see in the old community center, that view of those beautiful limestone cliffs in the back and the little natural bay that they would ship the smelted iron. And then here's an example, a reconstruction of one of the workers' cottages that the workers lived in. They were mostly brought over from Britain and Canada. So the 1860s was a little earlier than when people had started moving there from Eastern Europe and Scandinavia. So mostly British workers here. The company went out of business in 1891, and the town was abandoned soon after. Most of the workers moved to nearby towns like Escanaba to work in industries there. So now we're getting to Escanaba. This is the third largest city in the Upper Peninsula, and these are the former iron ore docks. So Escanaba was the main shipping port for iron ore from the Menominee Iron Range. You can see here, these are whaleback ships collecting the iron ore. So those chutes would come down and drop the iron ore onto the ship. So you can see just massive pieces of infrastructure that were taking up the whole Bay of Escanaba. As far as I know, these have all been torn down, and there's really hardly a trace of these left. So Escanaba had one of the largest German populations in Michigan, and a group of German immigrants started a brewing company there. This was their brewery building, built in 1901. This is a very popular German style that was known as the round arch style that they brought over. Um, the brewery went out of business, obviously, during Prohibition, and there was a brief attempt to bring it back in the 30s, but that failed. And it sat vacant for, I think, around 50 years before they converted it into a new office building. So now you have a photography studio in there, a bunch of small businesses. So really nice example of adaptive reuse. Next door, you have the office building for the brewing company. And if you look here at the little relief on the top, that was the logo of the Richter Brewing Company. Here we have the Harbor Tower built in 1970, and this is the tallest building in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So this is housing for senior citizens, not the most glamorous building, but it is the tallest. Here we have the Sandpoint Lighthouse, which is featured in the exhibit here. So as the iron ore trade started picking up through the 1860s and Escanaba became an important port for shipping it, they realized they were going to need a lighthouse. The federal government put funds together for it throughout the 1860s, and it was eventually built in 1867. So the lighthouse keeper, his name was John Terry. He died a month before the lighthouse was finished construction. His wife, Mary Terry, took over as the lighthouse keeper from 1868 to 1886. She was one of the few women lighthouse keepers on the Great Lakes at that time. Unfortunately, in 1886, the lighthouse caught on fire and she was killed in the fire. So there's a big tragedy connected with this lighthouse. Here we have a lighthouse bollard in Menominee, Michigan. So just kind of seeing how the maritime influence affected some things, you know, just the general built environment. This is the Menominee Waterworks. So this was actually for drinking water. Water was pumped in from Lake Michigan and filtered here. And this is now on the list of water engineering landmarks. So the main industry in Menominee was lumber. It was a major Great Lakes lumber town. The lumber barons built the Opera House in Menominee in 1902 as a gift to the city. The architect, George O. Garnsey, is actually a Chicago architect. He mostly designed Victorian houses in suburbs of Chicago. I know DeKalb County has quite a few houses by him, but not a super notable Chicago architect, but you can see there is a large influence from Chicago in this part of the peninsula. That's a good question. It looks like some type of limestone detail. Yeah, like a lintel of some kind. The theater. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. No, I think that's just. You're right. It is kind of an unusual detail that I don't know if I've seen before. But yeah, I think it's just a stone lintel there. So, the Opera House was eventually converted to a movie theater in the 1920s. And then in 1950, a fire shut down the building and it has been vacant ever since. It is currently being restored by the Michigan State Historic Preservation Office. So after about 75 years of being empty, this will be reopened as a theater for like live plays and that type of thing in the next few years. Here you can see a newspaper ad from when it first opened. They had John Philip Sousa there. So at the time, one of the most famous musicians in the world. So even a small town like Menominee was bringing some really big names to perform there. Now we're getting into the iron ranges. This is Big John at the Iron Mountain Iron Mine in Vulcan, Michigan, just outside of Iron Mountain. This was the largest of the dozens of iron mines in the region. around Iron Mountain. And you can see here all that iron money brought them this beautiful cedar in Iron Mountain. This is the Bremen cedar from 1924. The firm Herbst and Coonsley was one of the most prominent firms in the Upper Peninsula. They had offices in Marquette and Houghton, and we'll see quite a few more buildings by them. This is the commercial bank in Iron Mountain. So this was basically the main banking institution for all of the Western Upper Peninsula. And in my opinion, this is the most impressive example of Art Deco architecture in the Upper Peninsula. So I like to show this photo here. You can really see how the light affects how you see the building at different times of day. So I like to show that just to show how the weather affects our perception of the building. Yeah. So here we can see some of those relief sculptures. Some really elaborate Art Deco detail. Again, this was the most impressive example of that style in the Upper Peninsula. This is the Immaculate Conception Church in Iron Mountain. It was built in 1902 by the Italian community of Iron Mountain. By percentage, Iron Mountain is one of, if not the most Italian city in Michigan, even though Italians are not necessarily associated with these type of rural areas. A lot of them came to work in the iron mines. And this was the center of the community. It was modeled off of a Renaissance style church that you would find in a small Italian village, like where most of the immigrants came from. More of that Italian culture in Iron Mountain. This is Bimbo's, home of the genuine Italian pig roast. Now, outside of Iron Mountain, you have a small town of Caspian, Michigan. The population is in the hundreds, definitely less than 1,000. And again, one of the most Italian places in all of Michigan. I think the town was something like 50% Italian at its peak. So this was the Italian Duke of Abruzzi Hall. It was built in 1914. And this was basically like a Masonic temple or an Elks Lodge, but for the Italian community. So this is the inside. It's currently being restored by the community, and they have a antique store in there that they're using the proceeds from to fund the restoration. And when it was being used as a fraternal organization, they had a hall for dancing inside the building. They had a sausage making room, and they also had wine making facilities. They also have, I believe, the only bocce ball court in the Upper Peninsula. So that is the Italian culture of the peninsula, a sort of under-recognized but important part of Michigan history. Also in Caspian, you have the Iron County Historical Museum, which calls itself the log cabin capital of Michigan. They've brought log structures from all over the Upper Peninsula and created an outdoor museum there. So you have some really fine examples of log construction. This is one of the main things that the Finnish community brought over. They were experts in log construction. They brought saunas over, which were built from logs, which we'll see. This was built as the offices of a logging camp. Here's an example of a log sauna. It was built in 1900 in Beechwood, Michigan. Again, probably one of the biggest contributions of Finnish culture to Michigan. Here is a Finnish barn. You can see here some of the unique techniques they use, like burning some of the boards. There's some overlapping boards, a really highly skilled log construction. Then here we have some mini examples. We have a playhouse from 1939 and a really beautifully constructed log outhouse. So this is Ironwood, Michigan. This was the Chicago and Northwestern Depot. This connected Chicago to the Upper Peninsula to bring down freight as well as passengers. So here you can see maybe one of the first examples we're seeing of the use of that sandstone. So you can see that with the columns here and along the base. This is, to me, one of the most impressive train stations in the Upper Peninsula, though. And the architect, Charles Grindle, was again an architect from Chicago that they brought up. Here you can see another view of that train station. Passenger service here ended in 1971. So even into the 70s, you could take the train from Chicago to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Outside of Ironwood, you have the Copper Peak ski jump. This was built in 1969 and is the only ski flying facility in North America. So ski flying, the only difference from ski jumping is that it's slightly higher and longer distances. So it's the most extreme form of skiing. Competitions were held here from the 70s into the 90s. It hasn't been used in about 25, 30 years at this point, but here you can see an old ad for it. So they still use it to have concerts at the base. They'll have little festivals and stuff there, but here you can see that jump that you're doing. I'm not exactly sure the distance, but I would never find out. Not for me. And from the top of the structure, you can see into Minnesota and Wisconsin. So here you can see this is the elevator that takes you up to the top, probably the shakiest, scariest elevator ride that you will ever be on. So in Bessemer, here you can see you're really in Packers country. Yeah. I think that's part of it. Also, 1971 was a year that I think that was the year that Amtrak was created, and they shut down a lot of passenger service as sort of like yeah. So I think when Amtrak took over, they shut down a lot of stations and sort of consolidated to the most important. So now we're getting into the copper ranges of the Keweenaw Peninsula. I like to show this map from the early 1900s showing the different copper claims by the various copper companies. So the main ones here are the pink here is the Calumet and Hecla Company. The yellow is the Quincy Mining Company. And then there were quite a few other ones. People have asked me why the mining companies own so much land. The reason is that they needed timberlands to harvest timber. To think about all the miles of underground mines, they had to use full logs to hold up the interior of the mines. So there was a massive amount of timber that was needed for the mining industry, and also was used for fuel. So here's just another close-up of that copper range. So we're going to start looking at White Pine at the bottom there and go up into Houghton and Hancock and Calumet, which were the major copper cities. So White Pine, Michigan was the last copper mine founded in Michigan. 1955, all the major copper mines had already closed down. Those copper mines had native copper, which came in giant pieces. Some were even so big that they couldn't even pull them out of the mine. They had to blow them up into smaller pieces. The mines at White Pine were sort of a last-ditch effort to make some money off copper. It was copper sulfide, so it was more like ores that they would have to filter out from sand and dirt. So it was built as a company town by the White Pine Mining Company, and they built this sort of mid-century modern planned community. So this was the school. You can see here White Pine High School. And then they had a few different models of these sort of standard mid-century modern houses that you could choose from if you were working there. So you had this sort of classic split level style. And then the crown jewel of White Pine is the high school natatorium. Beautiful mid-century modern building. And then up close, you see these really cool brick reliefs showing diving. So now going back, finally getting up to the coast of Lake Superior in Ontonagon. This was not a major port, but still used for shipping copper, the port in Ontonagon. This tiny little streamlined modern structure here was the bridge operator's house. So there's a bridge over the Ontonagon River that they had to lift when ships were coming through. And this cool little streamlined structure here was where the bridge operator stayed. Ontonagon is also the origin of US 45. And you can see here, Ontonagon is almost directly north of where we are here in Chicago. So that road went from Ontonagon on the coast of Lake Superior through Chicago and all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico in Mobile, Alabama. This is South Range, Michigan, and we're going to start to see more of the influence of the Finnish community. This was the Kaliva Temple, built in 1910. Again, this was a Finnish fraternal organization like an Elks Lodge. The Kaliva is named after the national epic poem of Finland called the Kalevala. So if you ever see anything with Kaliva in the name, you will know that that is associated with Finns. So now when we get further into the Keweenaw Peninsula, you really have to understand the Keweenaw waterway to see how this all fit together. So you had Portage Lake in the middle here. You had some rivers where it was flowing out to Lake Superior here, and then to the south, also into Lake Superior. Throughout the 1850s and 60s, this was dredged to create a waterway that would connect all the way from one side of Lake Superior to the other. So you would be able to have shipments of goods coming into the major cities like Houghton, as well as shipping out the copper from this area. So here you have Houghton and Hancock on each side of the waterway here. You had Calumet up here, which was the other major copper mining town. So Calumet, they would ship by train that ore down to Lake Linden town here, which was where they had the processing mills. So up here is where the copper was processed. You also had other mills all along here where the copper from Hancock was shipped to. So Torch Lake here was really the major industrial hub of the copper industry. So here we see some views of Houghton and Hancock on both sides of that waterway. In my opinion, these are the two most beautiful cities in Michigan, almost European looking with buildings going up those hillsides. Here you can see the Portage Lake Lift Bridge. This connects the two sides of the Keweenaw waterway. So this was built in 1959. Before that, there was a smaller swing bridge that was considered a nuisance to shipping traffic and did not provide enough clearance. So 1959, they built this new lift bridge. So you can see here, this is the standard position, and it can lift all the way up to 100 feet to allow ships to go through. So here you can see a photo from shortly after it was built, and you can see that there were also train tracks going underneath the bridge. Here's another view of that bridge where you can get a little better idea of that steel structure. And then here was the bridge operator's house. So really huge house for a bridge operator. I can't find much information about this house. I don't know if there was sort of a team that lived here or if the bridge operator lived here with his family, but they preserved that house right next to the bridge. Here we have one of the great lost buildings in Michigan history. This was the Amphidrome in Houghton, Michigan, built in 1902 and eventually burned down in a fire in 1927. This is considered the birthplace of professional hockey. The Portage Lakes hockey team in the 1903 season was the first paid hockey team in anywhere in the world. They played against the University of Toronto. They played against teams from Minnesota and Wisconsin. So that sort of upper Midwest is really the heartland of hockey in America. You can see here an actual photo of the Amphidrome against the waterway in that extremely harsh Upper Peninsula winter. And when it was burned down, you can kind of see this arched structure here. They basically rebuilt it as just that without the big castle attached to it. Here we have the fire station in Houghton. This was built in 1883. Obviously a beautiful fire station, but more importantly, this was the original home of Michigan Tech University, which was originally the Michigan School of Mines. They had their first classes in the second floor here and rented it out from the fire station for about 5 years before they got their own campus. This is the Douglas House Hotel in Houghton. This was considered the most luxury hotel in the Upper Peninsula. Politicians, diplomats, businessmen, this is where they would stay. The architect, Henry Ottenheimer, again, brought up from Chicago. He was actually a employee of Louis Sullivan, the very famous Chicago architect. And he actually worked with Frank Lloyd Wright at the office of Louis Sullivan. Obviously, you can see they went in much different directions, him and Frank Lloyd Wright. And allegedly, they were not friendly with each other and, in fact, got in a physical fight at Louis Sullivan's office. So you can see here, he built this beautiful hotel in an Italian Renaissance style. And you can see here these beautiful terracotta details. And actually, the domes on the top were covered in gold. Also in Houghton, just the sign here, this is where you can catch the seaplane to Isle Royale, which is another popular Michigan tourist destination, although not part of the Upper Peninsula. But this is where you'll catch a plane. Across the waterway in Hancock, this is the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church, built in 1889. So just as an example of the Finnish influence, Hancock had one of the largest Finnish populations anywhere in America. Thank you. Okay. All right, we are back. Thank you guys. So, okay, the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church. Yeah. Okay. Okay, should we give it a second?
This is such a fun peek behind the curtain, isn't it, everybody?
Okay, now we're really back. So, back to the Finns. Here you can see the name of the church written out in the Finnish language. Suomi is the Finnish word for Finn. I don't know if it's for Finns or for Finland, but anything with Suomi that is associated with the Finns. And so here you can see they even have street signs with the Finnish language in Hancock. So again, the heartland of the Finns in Michigan. Another interesting building in Hancock, this is the only synagogue in the Upper Peninsula. This is Temple Jacob that was built in 1912. There was a small Jewish population spread out around the peninsula, mostly working in industries like clothing stores, grocery stores, other types of small retail. So they had one central synagogue in Hancock, and Jewish people from all around the peninsula would come here for the holidays. So here you can see a better view of that beautiful stained glass window. So the main thing in Hancock, the reason that it exists, is the Quincy copper mine. This is the head frame of the copper mine. This was built in 1908. Here you can see a diagram of what's going on inside there. So the copper was coming up from here and then getting sorted through all these things and eventually dropped down onto the freight trains here. Quincy operated their copper mine from 1846 to 1945. So 99 years this was an operation. It was known as Old Reliable because it paid dividends out from the 1860s through the 1920s every single year. So at the end of its life, when it closed in 1945, it was the longest mine shaft anywhere in the world at over 9,000 feet underground. Yeah, almost 2 miles on an angle going into the ground. So this was the company store at the Quincy mine. So the miners had to buy all their own supplies and then owed that money to the company. They had to buy the candles that they held to light inside the mines. They had to buy their own drills, all the materials they used they had to buy on their own. This is the pay office for the mine. So this is where the miners or their wives would come to pick up the pay on Fridays. Mostly it was the wives because the miners didn't even get enough time off to pick up their paychecks on Friday. So that's something that they told us on the mine tour here. This is the hoist house for the mine, built in 1918. Very unique building with that concrete frame around the outside. This was one of the earliest examples of sort of combining concrete with a more traditional style like this. Then you can see inside, this is the steam hoist. This was the largest steam hoist ever built anywhere in the world. It was built in Milwaukee by the Nordberg Company and shipped up to Hancock. We could probably fit everyone in this room inside of that hoist there. Just a giant structure that was used to pull the miners in and out of the mine. This is where the hoist operator sat. This was one of the most prestigious and important jobs at the mine. He had to be on alert at all times in case there was an emergency and someone needed to be pulled out. If there was a copper load ready to go, this was a very, very important job. So here we see the Quincy and Torch Lake Railway. This was actually built in 1997 and is used for taking tourists down into the mine. It replaced what was originally there, very similar type of cog railway that was used to take the copper from the mine at the top of the hill to the processing mills along the lake at the bottom of the hill. So here we can see inside the mine. You get an idea of what that mine shaft looked like. The thing that really struck me from this tour is the miners that were in there, all they had for light was one candle. So they could only see a few feet in front of them. So there were miners that spent years, decades of their lives down in these mines, and they never saw this. They didn't know what they were inside. They could see a few feet in front of them, and that's it. So I thought that was really amazing that they just had no idea what they were building inside of there. Here we can see an underground classroom inside of the mine. This was used by Michigan Tech for their mining engineering program from the 70s into the 90s. Unfortunately, the mining engineering program there is very, very small now. None of the copper mines are still active, so it's not really relevant these days, but they still have a small program there. Here you can see the boiler house for the mine. The interesting thing here is the material. So this is built out of basalt, which is a pretty rare building material in the Midwest, but this was a byproduct of the copper mines. This was sort of scrap that they pulled out along with the copper. So using as a building material was a way for the companies to save money and sort of stretch the materials as far as possible. So moving up to Calumet, the other major copper mining city, you can see again in the offices for the Calumet and Hecla Company, they were using some of that basalt stone here in a little bit more artistic and interesting way. This is the pay window inside the office, again, where the miners or their wives are picking up the paycheck on Fridays. You can see here, they would just slide it through this little trap door in the bottom of the window there. This is downtown Calumet, one of the most well-preserved historic towns in the Upper Peninsula, currently being renovated by the State Historic Preservation Office. So you can see here some of those really elaborate commercial buildings built with that copper money. You can see here some of that renovation work being done. This is the Calumet Theater, built in 1900. This was considered the most lavish theater experience, built of that beautiful sandstone along the base. Then you can see inside, really elaborately detailed, very beautifully preserved, and still in use as a theater for the local community. This is the monument to the Italian Hall disaster in Calumet. This is one of the most famous industrial disasters in Michigan history. On the Christmas Eve night of 1913, this was during the major copper strike at the time. The striking miners and their wives and children were having a party in the Italian Hall. Despite the name Italian Hall, the union and most of the attendees at this event were Finnish. I believe 75% of the victims of the disaster were Finnish women and children. During the party on Christmas Eve, someone yelled fire, and it led to a stampede in which 73 people were killed trying to exit the building. So you can see here, this was the door to the Italian Hall that's been preserved. This is an old photo, kind of grainy, but you can see the door right here. That is the door where the stampede happened and the disaster took place. So there was no fire. It was a false fire claim. And here you can see the funeral. Obviously, something like this was a huge catalyst for radicalizing the miners and the union. Eventually, they were defeated in the strike. The companies won, and they didn't end up unionizing the copper mines until later in the 1930s. The Western Federation of Miners, which was the union they were trying to organize with, they'd used up all their funds organizing the mines in Colorado and Montana. So by the time the strike here hit, they just didn't have funds left to support it. So the owners of the mines, the enemy in that copper strike, they had the good sense to live a little farther away. They built their own little town called Laurium next to Calumet, named after the town of Lavria in Greece, which was a silver mining town. So you can see in Laurium some of those giant houses built for the mining executives and other upper management at the mines. So now we're getting to Lake Linden, Michigan. So this was the main processing facility for the copper in Calumet, and it had the largest copper processing facility in the world in the early 1900s. So despite being a factory town, it also has one of the most important historic districts in the Upper Peninsula. So you can see here some of that beautiful commercial architecture, one of the nicest looking hardware stores in Michigan here, and more of that sandstone on the bank in town. You can see here another one of these really elaborate, beautiful city hall buildings that was built with all that copper money. And it's a really quaint town. They still have the old school fountain service, luncheon and ice cream shop. And they've even preserved some of these original tile entrances in the storefronts. Now, this photo is the Calumet and Hecla Smelting Complex. This is the aforementioned copper processing facility. I think this is a really interesting photo. It almost looked like a city within a city, or like a little industrial town with all the big smokestacks. This has all been demolished. None of this is left. But this was the main copper facility for most of the Keweenaw Peninsula. Here you can see in Torch Lake, just outside of Lake Linden, this is the Quincy Dredge number 2 from 1914. Here you can see what it looked like when it was built. So after the copper mines had sort of come to the end of their useful life, by the late teens and early 20s, there was more advanced technology for processing copper. So in the earlier years, they had dumped all the sands from the copper mills just into the lake. There are, in some parts of the lake, up to 40, 50 feet of waste from copper mills. And the companies decided, okay, now that the technology is better, we can dredge up some of that waste that we had dumped earlier and reprocess it to try to get more copper out of it. So originally it was owned by the Calumet and Hecla Company. Later they sold the dredge to the Quincy Mining Company, who wanted to take a stab at it. So this was another one of those sort of last-ditch efforts to make money from the copper up here. Yeah. I know that I'm not sure if it's a Superfund site, but I know that there has been over the years work to clean some of that and remedy some of the environmental damage. I'm not sure exactly what the status of that is. They really tell you a lot up there that there isn't health consequences from it. I don't know if that's true. I'm kind of skeptical, but that's what they say. But there is still, yeah, a great deal of copper pollution in the waterways up there. So now we're going a little bit south of the Keweenaw. We haven't really talked much about the timber industry in the Upper Peninsula. This was the Ford Center, built in 1936 in Alberta, Michigan. So Henry Ford had an initiative where he built little rural industries all over Michigan. Most of them were in the outskirts of Detroit, near the auto factories, but in the 30s, they were still using quite a bit of wood in automobiles for steering wheels, side panels, all types of things. And so Henry Ford built his own sawmill up in the Upper Peninsula to build this little Ford company town. So this was the sawmill. Here you can see part of that infrastructure of the sawmill. This was the offices for Ford up there. And then they built originally a dozen houses for employees at the sawmill. Eventually that expanded up to 25 to 30 houses. After they were done in the 1950s, wood was not used as much in cars anymore. Ford actually donated the whole town to Michigan Tech University, and they now use it for their forestry program. So students at Michigan Tech actually live in the little town. This is the old schoolhouse that they use for their classes. And there are still just normal residents that live in the houses, but they have a small dorm complex where the students live in town. So now we're getting into the Marquette Iron Range. We're going to look at Negaunee and Ishpeming, and then Marquette itself. So this is the Cleveland Cliffs mine shaft at the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Mine in Ishpeming. Most likely the only Egyptian obelisk style mine shaft anywhere in the world. This was designed by the Chicago architect George Washington Marr, contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright, very important prairie style architect. The company did not want to have the standard sheet metal shaft house, so they brought him to design this very, very unique mine shaft structure. There actually are two of these on the site on opposite ends, but you can only see the one from outside of the complex. Here's another view. Pretty much anywhere in town, you can see these obelisks sticking up through the trees. This is the copy hoist at the same mine. This is the first and one of the only copy hoists in North America. This was technology brought over from Germany. This is sort of the standard hoist structure used in much of Europe. The main benefit here is that the hoist could be put into the top of the head frame, so that would save space on the ground level. So that was the main draw of this technology. So they built this in 1955, and sort of this interesting alien looking structure just looming over the whole town. You can see inside how that hoist worked. And again, the money from the iron industry brought them this beautiful public library, one of the most grand public libraries in the Upper Peninsula, and more of that Jacobsville sandstone used for details here. On your way out of Ishpeming, you can pass the Upper Tourist Trap, which is home to Big Gus, the largest working chainsaw in the world. In Negaunee, this is the former offices of the Iron Cliffs Company, one of the other major iron mining companies based out of Cleveland. This is now used as the administration for the local school board. And more of those beautiful municipal buildings built with that mining money. This is the Negaunee City Hall, designed by an architect named John Chubb. You have that copper roof on the tower, that really interesting limestone banding all around the building. One of my favorite buildings in Upper Peninsula here. Now to Marquette. This is the, I guess, unofficial capital of the Upper Peninsula and the major urban center. Sault Ste. Marie is actually, I believe, the largest city by population, but Marquette's really like the city of the Upper Peninsula. This is their city hall, built in 1894. Very unique, eclectic mix of styles here. You have the roof drawn from the French Second Empire. You have the Richardsonian Romanesque style with the big sandstone blocks. So really unique building here. And you can see some of that carved sandstone. So actually, just this photo, you can kind of see the smoothly polished version and the rough version above it. And then also these leaded glass windows. So here we have the fresh fish store on the shore of Marquette. This is for Thill and Sons Fish House. This is one of the most famous smoked fish dealers in the Upper Peninsula. And the specialty here, smoked fish sausage, one of the more unappealing looking things that you could eat, but it's actually pretty delicious. It's like a smoked fish pate. It's just probably the worst delivery system for it in this tube here. This is the old city waterworks in Marquette, built in 1891. Another beautiful sandstone building. This now is home to the Marquette Maritime Museum, so sort of a cousin to our museum here. They took over the waterworks in the 1980s after the building had sort of run its useful life, and a larger, more modern waterworks system was built for the city. So here you can see another view, and they're, I guess, known for having their collection of Fresnel lenses, which were a specific type of lighthouse lens. That's the thing that this maritime museum. This is the little castle that was home to the Upper Peninsula Brewing Company. So another small brewery up there, currently home to a law firm. So just to look at a couple examples of the houses in Marquette, this was the Daniel Merritt House built in 1880. Again, using that sandstone, really unique French Second Empire style house. Here, a smaller little cottage built of that sandstone. Some other styles not using the sandstone. This is a Dutch Revival house, one of my favorites in Marquette. I really like the mix of those shingles with the stone arch here. I think a really nice use of material. And then this wonderful eclectic little duplex in Marquette, built in the Victorian era. Now to me, the star of the Upper Peninsula, this is the Lower Harbor Ore Deck in Marquette. This was built in 1931, replacing structures that had been there going back through probably the 1860s or 70s. So this is where the iron ore from the Marquette Iron Range was shipped out of. This one is no longer in use, but at its peak, this was shipping 9 to 10 yeah, 9.5 to 10 million tons of ore a year were coming out of here. So there's sort of a concrete base, and then this steel structure built on top of that. So here you can see from the other side where you can get a better view of those chutes that were coming down to drop the iron ore. And here you can see from the side just how long and massive these structures were. Just giant, giant pieces of infrastructure. On the north side of Marquette, you have the Upper Harbor Ore Dock from 1912. This one is still in use. This is one of the few iron ore docks on Lake Superior that's still being used. There's still, I believe, 2 active iron mines in the Marquette Iron Range, and this is their main shipping point. So they actually have schedules where you can look when the ships are coming and watch the ships being loaded with iron. So you can see, looking the other way, where the trains drive on top of those docks. Sorry, I don't know if I mentioned that. So the trains drive onto the top of the docks, and then they dump the ore down these chutes onto the ship. This one here, you mean? Yeah, so this is just being preserved as a landmark. It's sort of like a symbol of the city. and just a popular tourist attraction as well. So now we're getting to Munising. This is the rear range lighthouse in Munising, built in 1908. This is one of, if not the only example of a rear range lighthouse on the Great Lakes, and one of the only few surviving anywhere in the US. So to explain a rear range lighthouse, it was paired with a front range lighthouse to create a pair of range lights. And you can see here in Munising, the ships would have to come in through this little passage between Grand Island into the bay. And this was a very, very treacherous passage. There were tons of shipwrecks here over the years, which is eventually why they built these range lights. So here you can see how the range lights work. You have one uphill and one downhill closer to the shore, and the ship basically needs to line them up, and that will guide them through the passage. So here you can see a better idea of how that would actually work when you're looking at it from the ship. You have to line those lights up and hope for the best. Also in Munising, another famous fishery of the Upper Peninsula. This is Matson's Fisheries. You can see here another example of the fish smoking house with the dog hanging out in front. And here is the fried whitefish from Matson's. Cool. So now we're getting to the final stop, Sault Ste. Marie and the famous Soo Locks. So this was one of the, along with the Erie Canal, major infrastructure project of pre-Civil War America. They basically had to build this to open up Lake Superior, shipping and being able to ship the mass amounts of copper and iron from Lake Superior. So you can see here, there were these rapids on the St. Mary's River, which is what required the locks in the first place. So here you have the American side where there were 4 locks. There's also one on the Canadian side, which you will be ignoring. Here's a diagram showing the 4 locks. The MacArthur lock from 1943, the Poe lock from 1968, and then the now discontinued Sabin and Davis locks from the 1910s. Those are currently being replaced by one larger lock. So there will be 3 functioning locks, hopefully in the near future. Apparently there's some issues with funding and the project's taken a while, but that should be opening in the next few years. I think that it's supposed to, yeah, the new one is supposed to be larger than the 2 operating ones here. And I think what it's going to be is like this one is going to be filled in and just backfilled here. And then this one is going to be expanded into a larger lock. So here you can see a view from 1865. So 1855 was the year when this first opened, but even from 1865, you can see it was still this sort of primitive log structure. And actually, even at that time, there was still a small Native American village on the island in the middle of the river. So you had the locks and then just this small native village right next to it. And here you can see an image showing how the locks operated in those early days. Here, and just to give a few figures on the locks, this is the busiest lock system anywhere in the world. It sees between 8 and 10,000 ships passing through it a year. And 86 million tons of cargo pass through here. So basically all the iron from Minnesota is coming through here, and all the other natural resources shipped from the Great Lakes. It draws 500,000 visitors annually, making it probably the most popular tourist destination in the Upper Peninsula. And 90% of iron ore from the Great Lakes is coming through this lock. Also, there are electric dams built alongside the locks that supply power to the nearby area. And, according to what I've read, I obviously have never been through here on a ship. It takes about 9 hours to fully get through the river and the locks and through the entire channel. So it's a pretty long process to get through here. So here's another, this is when they had started to modernize the locks in the 1890s. So this is the Poe lock. I had said that was built in 1968. So they had taken the existing lock and modernized it again in 1968. So next to the locks, this is the last building we're going to look at. One of the great building boondoggles in Michigan history. This is the Tower of History. It was built in 1968, designed by a Minneapolis firm called Progressive Design Associates. They were mostly known for designing school buildings, interestingly, but they were brought all the way here for this project in Sault Ste. Marie. This project was spearheaded by the Diocese of Marquette, which covered the whole Upper Peninsula. And they wanted to create a tourist attraction that would also teach people about the history of the church, as well as the Sioux locks. So people could go up to the top of the tower and basically watch the locks operate from up there. The original plan, however, was much bigger. So you can see here some models of what the project was supposed to look like. The tower did actually get built. However, you can see here the tower is this little thing in the corner here. And it was only a very small part of what was supposed to be a much bigger project. So they were originally going to have a church built here, a large classroom building here, and then a conference center and museum in this side. So none of this right here. Here you can see what that entire plaza was supposed to look like. And then here's what it looks like nowadays, kind of a sad shadow of what it was supposed to be. You can see the top where you can still go up there and get great views of the locks operating, but it never really lived up to the image that it was going for in these early days when it was first being promoted. And now they just have this sort of strange concrete tower just looming over the city of Sault Ste. Marie. So that was the last stop, and now I'm going to open it to questions.
For the people at home, if you could restate the question,
Yeah.
if anyone here is like. Oh.
If you take any photos on all the students, the stuff at Finlandia University.
I did, yes. I do have photos from there. They didn't make it into this part of the presentation. There is a really interesting building by Eero Saarinen there, a very early project by him. He did one of the educational halls at Finlandia University. So sorry, to restate the question, I was asked if I saw any buildings at Finlandia University in Hancock, Michigan. If you don't know, Finlandia was a college associated with the Finnish Lutheran Church, and it actually closed in 2023, I believe. So it was a really big part of the Finnish community up there, but like a lot of smaller colleges, they just couldn't keep going and closed in 2023. But still have quite a beautiful campus in yeah. So, I cover a lot of parts of the Midwest, and I tend to gravitate towards the parts that are hilly and have really interesting natural features. I grew up in Detroit, spent a lot of time in Chicago, everything's flat. So I really was drawn to the Upper Peninsula for that reason. I also am really interested in the history of mining, and sort of the labor movement associated with that. So that's sort of what drew me in. But the Upper Peninsula is so famous for its natural beauty that I thought it'd be interesting to look at the architectural beauty up there, which is actually overlooked by a lot of people. And some of the cities up there are a little bit underappreciated. So yeah, that's what drew me up there. Even though I grew up in Michigan, I didn't really spend much time up there growing up. It was really the last maybe 5 years or so that I've been traveling up there. So the question was if there was any sandstone quarries around Marquette. I actually didn't see any of the quarries while I was up there, so I'm not 100% sure where those quarries are. I'm assuming in the Keweenaw Peninsula is where most of them are, and I'm assuming they're kind of in like off the beaten path, off the major roads. So I didn't see those, but those were shipped all over the Great Lakes. So Detroit, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Buffalo, Erie, Pennsylvania. All the major Great Lakes cities are getting shipments of that sandstone. So you can see that material all over the Midwest. And even it was getting shipped out to New York City. There were also some parts of the interior of Ohio that had sandstone that was used for building. So that was also shipped around the Midwest. But the Jacobsville sandstone from the Upper Peninsula was the most prized sandstone for building. Oh, on islands.
New York for brownstone.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
Something that's led by the English 22 lab.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
So, something too, you start to put in the big blast furnaces and say, but that is the most interesting structure in that.
You're right. So I'm trying to, I think when I was there, there was some type of like, yeah, I think that they were being work, there was some type of preservation work going on there. So yeah, those are really, it's a really interesting structure, but it was not really visible when I was there. But yeah, those are really interesting to see those furnaces.
Architecturally and everything. Any new construction stuff like that, if there is any.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question was basically, since most of the mining and industry has died out in the Upper Peninsula, what are their industries now? So it's a really good question. The main industry is tourism. So I would say the towns that have done better up there are the ones that have really adapted to being tourist towns. So Houghton is a big one. Iron Mountain, there's a lot of, skiing and snowboarding stuff in that area. Marie has all the tourism to the Sioux Locks. The other thing is that there's Northern Michigan University and Michigan Tech University. Michigan Tech's in Houghton, and Northern Michigan's in Marquette. So those two cities have really been anchored by the colleges up there. That's really helped them sort of transition past the mining. At least in the copper country, the copper industry had really mostly died out by the 1920s. So they've had a pretty long time to sort of adjust to that and turn their economy more towards tourism. So I would say the copper regions really have fared a lot better. Some of the old mining towns that are, sort of just in the middle of nowhere near the border with Wisconsin, they're not on the lakes or anything. They've had a much tougher time adapting. Some of the towns I went to were like, a town that had 1,000 people and now there's 50 or 100 left. There's quite a few of those, especially in the iron mining regions. There are still a few iron mines active near Marquette, so that's boosts the economy in that region. But yeah, I would say tourism is overwhelmingly the main thing keeping some of these cities afloat. And I was actually surprised. I mean, I've met people from Minnesota up there, the Dakotas, even as far as Montana. So it seemed like there's really a lot of tourism from kind of that upper part of the country that goes to the UP. And yes, yes.
We'll go on to the canal for Josh and I'll let you go.
Yeah.
I don't remember where it was, but there was one of four people. In the village.
Trying to remember.
Where he was was.
That was the Architecture Museum.
Ah, okay. Well, let's see. I don't remember that. Ah, okay. I'm not sure. Military history is like the thing I probably know the least about. So I don't have a good answer. I would assume that it's maybe connected to something naval that they have on display at the museum. But that's a good question. Unfortunately, yeah, no, that is odd. I didn't notice that. And unfortunately, the museum was closed while I was there, so I didn't actually get to see their displays in there. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you on that. Yeah, I'll have to go next time I'm up there. I'll have to ask about that one. Okay, perfect. Okay. I knew that you guys must have some like maritime museum hangout. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you everyone again for coming on.